Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon for those of you joining us around the world. Welcome to Talkwalker's webinar today on new narratives of financial inclusivity. This is, of course, a webinar for everyone, but I think it'll be of particular benefit to marketing, communications, PR, insights professionals working in that financial services, banking sector. We'll have a particular focus on the EMEA region, but absolutely this is applicable globally as well. We'll have a particular focus on using social intelligence to drive communications ideation. Really keen that you have something that you can take away today, not just lots of lovely chat, which I'm sure we'll get into. So without further ado, let's kick off. I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. We'll go from right to left, seeing as I'm speaking already. My name is Jack Richards. I'm the marketing team lead for Northern Europe here at Talkwalker. I'm a chartered manager, member of the Public Relations and Communications Association, associate of the Chartered Institute of Marketing, a broadcaster specializing in communications. And I will be your host for today. But we've got a great panel of experts aside from me who will be steering things today. Stephanie, our senior partner and Vision, brings broad experience of the world of quantitative and qualitative research and analysis, particularly with her work at Publicis and Linkfluence. With that, a versatile academic training background in social sciences, the history of art, and in business. And that business, of course, bringing an entrepreneurial spirit to today's proceedings. Charlotte has been at Talkwalker for 7 years, part of the furniture here. It's safe to say Charlotte is an expert, a safe pair of hands in the implementation of social intelligence projects, especially when it comes to those more complex use cases, and especially when it comes to financial services in the region. Vic Thrift, our client development director at our friends at Discover AI, has spent the last 18 years, I don't believe that, 18 years working as a qualitative researcher, often within the realms of financial services, where she's helped clients in questions as diverse as what are the barriers that female investors face to what sustainable finance means in different markets and today's world. So without further ado, you're not here to hear about us, you're here to hear about this fantastic topic, new narratives of financial inclusivity. So some of the speakers are now going to disappear, so we're not staring at you for the next hour, but you'll hear from us all, and we will begin. So today's agenda, we've got four main points to cover off, but of course far more besides. So the first is a little bit about Talkwalker. I think it's really important to understand the context, the lens at which we've approached today's session, particularly how financial services, marketing and communications professionals can use the platform for improved content ideation, for more authentic communication, and for identifying messaging that will truly resonate with your audiences. We'll also be looking at the social landscape more broadly. So we'll be using Talkwalker to get to the heart of the financial inclusivity conversation, understanding the topics and themes that are prevalent and who that is resonating with. We'll then be adding a layer of what we would call cultural insights. So going beyond artificial intelligence driven insights to apply contextual human-led analysis that understands the socio-political nuances of the world we live in. And my goodness, if you're joining from the UK, there's certainly a few of those at the moment. And finally, of course, we want to end with some learnings. We're really keen for you to have stuff to take away. So we want you to understand what banks and financial services institutions need to do to close the consumer closeness gap, to bridge the gap between you as a brand and your consumers, to communicate authentically and reach your goals. And with that, I will hand over to our first speaker to get us underway.
Thanks, Jack, for this amazing introduction. So we have to start. How we can, we're going to start. So who is Talkwalker? So for perhaps some people don't know Talkwalker. So Talkwalker, what is it? This is a tech company. We started in 2009 as a web crawling technology. And today we are focused on consumer intelligence. We are a worldwide company. We have 11 offices. We are 650 experts. And today we have third of all the experts are like engineers or data scientists. So we are very focused on tech and IT. And thank you. I have to also introduce Discover AI. So who is Discover AI? So first, they joined Talkwalker in 2021. So the goal of Discover AI is to provide a qualitative deep dive into online sources to discover rich human stories and cultural insights. So what is the methodology? They have two axes. The first one is they develop or built an AI platform. So 5 years ago, I think, and they use all the human quality analysis to create and to find all the stretchy inspirations for the end client. So today we have Talkwalker with the IT tech part. So I'm going to explain what is it. And we're going to have Discover AI with the human analysis, because all the team, they have a background around semiotic and also psychology, anthropology, brand strategy. So this is like expert, not focused only on communication and marketing. So today the offering of Talkwalker and Discover. So Stephanie, you can move. We have, this is a mix of three things: data, AI, and human. So today we can say we have 4 areas of expertise. The first one is data, because just for reminder, so Talkwalker, this is like a crawler. So we can collect all the data in web and also social networks in real time. We develop AI, so at Talkwalker, but also with a platform built by Discover AI. We're going to explain that during this webinar. And we have also this platform. So the goal is to provide customized dashboard reporting to our client. And the last point is this part of human. So Vic, she's going to explain exactly what is the meaning of this. So today at Talkwalker, the goal is to help, to support all our clients to answer for different kinds of use case. So the main use case could be protect. So we have a lot of KPIs, analytics, visualization to help for the brand protection and also reputation management. Also, we have something around performance measurement and also reporting. And today we're going to focus on 2 use cases. The first one could be content ideation and trend research. So the goal, so Stephanie and Vic, they worked on this topic to deliver today how we can start with one question and how we can find insights to help the client to create the content around the one topic. So I think I'm going to ask Stephanie to go on and to explain the beginning of this on this topic.
Thank you, Charlotte. So today, we're talking about 2 banks and financial institutions in majority. And we just want to stress that we all understand that we're living through a specifically difficult time. Like after people have been hit by the wave of COVID, now poverty is on the way. And it looks like it's a very big wave and not an easy one to, to stand in front of. So we do see when we look at the conversations about the banks or the banking system, that are posted by individuals, that there is some sort of movement around these conversations. You see here through our beautiful graphs that the conversation is growing, but you also see that the type of associations with the word banks or banking are also changing. So here, big time, like you see that the two big things that emerge is warm banks and economic crisis. So warm banks is not really a bank, but this is the idea of people needing places to feel warm. And that's really resonating a lot with conversations. And the other thing that you see is, just the understanding that we are really entering a serious economic crisis, and the banks are sort of associated with that. All this conversation about banks and banking also is becoming more and more segmented, and you see that the negative aspect of conversations are growing significantly. You see this big surge in September of something red, which is the sign that things are pretty negative. And if we look at thematic analysis, and if we look at what are the big themes that are negatively connoted for people, you see that there are the big banks, and there is also a lot of stuff which is around people, like the poor people, ordinary people. So what that means is that you really have a sense of more and more conversations expressing sarcasm or frustration about what banks do. And on the other hand, people seem to be looking for new proposals and for some more care. So all of this shows us a growing disconnect between people and their banks. And therefore, we just wanted to see what we could do to sort of bridge the gap between people and banks. And that's why we decided to look at this topic of inclusivity. And the idea here is to try and understand how we can map out this topic of financial inclusivity. What does it exactly mean? And what can we do with it? So as a first step, we have used Talkwalker to get a maximum of inspiration. And to do that, we've built a very massive query, which is very stretchy. So it talks about many different things, but it allows to capture this topic of inclusivity versus money and finance. So what we see is that this conversation, no surprise, is a growing conversation over time, both in terms of volume and in terms of engagement. We can even see with our new tools of predictive analysis that this conversation is definitely here to stay, and that, it's just growing and growing. Then we also see with, other tools from our platform that quite naturally this conversation around financial inclusivity is not really different in terms of who is interested in that in terms of demographics versus a general conversation about banks and banking, but probably more women are interested and talking about this topic, which is quite natural. And what we can also do through Talkwalker is to try and see how the conversation is clustered. So you here have an example of a conversation cluster that shows you that, yes, the massive amount of the conversation, 30%, is really centered around state versus the cost of living. So therefore, it's very politically charged. But you also see that 60% of the conversation, things like charities, loans, or what money can buy, are more about some practical elements of the relationship with this financial inclusivity. So what we wanted to do here is to take it further and use the capacity of Discover AI to basically go beyond what we see with Talkwalker and uncover opportunity territories that can address this inclusivity challenge. So what I'll do here is I'll pass the mic to Vic, and Vic will take you through further analysis and explain how it all works. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Lovely to meet you remotely like this. But as Stephanie has said, the thing that we're really interested in was looking to identify some of those quite practical opportunities that come out of this. And in order to do that, we obviously have the beautiful baseline of that really stretchy Boolean that gives us a really fantastic, rich resource of social data. But combining that with a heap of other sources that are really where we feel like these conversations are going to be popping, where we're going to be able to see some of these conversations within context. So things like the personal finance section of online newspapers, women's finance services, emergent fintech brands, different blogs and forums that are discussing kind of community issues or moments of challenge with financial services. Pooling all of these together, we upload in this case 195 different sources from across the UK and Ireland into our AI-enabled platform. And if we move to the next slide, what we can see is that within our platform, effectively what it does is chunk up all of that lovely content into thousands and thousands and thousands of quotes. And then each of those quotes is individually scored against what we call our accelerate model. And this is really kind of the beating heart of our AI-enabled platform. And what that allows us to do is to start to see data that is clustering under particular human needs. And this model has been kind of built and trained and retrained over time. At this point, it's been trained against 1,000 projects. So it's got pretty nifty at sort of identifying where these moments of human need kind of speak through. And what that does then, in combination with the brilliant brains of our strategists, is allow us to get across a whole set of data very, very quickly in order to identify some of those emergent moments and emergent opportunities. In the case of this project, what we saw happening is that the toll of the cost of living crisis is obviously enormous. And what it's really driving are three particular kind of pillars of conversation that pop up out of the consumer discourse online. I'll take you through each of these in a little bit more detail shortly, but just as a kind of an overview, the first piece is very much around this sense of kind of new vulnerabilities. So as the economic crisis kind of grows day by day, actually there's a tranche of people kind of falling into what previously would be considered financial vulnerability, who historically have felt kind of relatively protected, who previously didn't feel threatened in that space. The other thing that we see is this cry for help, a need for advice that exists out there, people asking questions left, right and centre. And in lots of cases, there's advice being put forward, but that advice at the moment feels like it's really coming from often the wrong places. It's being delivered by unrealistic spokespeople, and it's not really reflecting the reality of people's worlds. And then the final piece, which will probably be no surprise to those of you working in financial services, is that mental health is really suffering under the weight of these financial issues. And this has kind of implications in terms of feeding that ever-growing kind of growth within the vulnerable consumer pool. So let's deep dive into the kinds of information we can get to sort of using these approaches. So what you'll see on this page is a combination of the information that has come through from the platform, where we've gone in and looked at it and thematically identified interesting areas. And the focus here really is all about this growing tranche of vulnerable audiences, of people falling into that space that wouldn't have historically. A real sense of sort of desperation growing up out there, people anticipating that actually you can see in the quote there in the middle that despite help sort of existing out there, a sense that really their personal financial situation might actually lock them out from that help, but they still really are feeling that need. What we can then do is, from identifying that space, if we move to the next slide, what we can see are three really interesting ways that we can start to really dig into that data. This is a little bit busy, so I think there'll probably be some follow-up kind of sent out from this afterwards, but there are really interesting points that we can start to then layer into this thinking. So one piece here is around kind of inspirational initiatives. So you can start to see these ideas that are coming through in the data set. So things from, say, Atom Bank there, or this NGO that is working to create a kind of Money Matters hub. You can start to identify the sort of language that people are using. So things like cut back, keeping afloat, ask for help, lacking support, it's getting worse and feeling desperate. You know, it allows you to really capture kind of the tone, the emotional heart of that conversation. And it allows us to start building some of those implications going forward, thinking very much about how can we start to do something with this practically, around the kind of the newness of a financial struggle, something that people who may not have necessarily kind of dealt with this in a sort of day in, day out basis, but actually right now are really feeling like they're kind of experiencing that struggle. Moving on to the next space, we can see that there is a huge need for advice, whether that's debt advice, whether it's practical kind of money tips, whatever those things and those needs are, there is definitely need for it. But at the same time, the services, particularly in the UK, are suffering all sorts of kind of cutbacks and barriers to delivering that. And you can see there in that quite powerful quote that the debt advice sector is on its knees at this point in time. What we're seeing kind of come out of that is, you know, advice, information, support being offered, but often from the wrong place. And what we're seeing is a lot of that sarcasm, that kind of growing frustration coming through in this space of conversation. And I think you can see there in the quote in the centre, sort of, don't worry, guys, about the cost of living. We can just eat mouldy bread and kind of and embrace the benefits of fasting. So just this real sense that actually what is coming through is not necessarily that authentic for people. Similarly, on the next slide, what we see there are various spokespeople coming through who feel authentic, who talk in a way that matters to people, who are finding the right tone, who are giving people the right perspective on things. And you can see the need here kind of expressed again through the language, whether that's advice, effective, accessible, free, realistic. It has to be kind of centered in the context of people's worlds. And for anyone who works in marketing, the sense here is obviously that tone, brand, and spokesperson are key, but actually really getting to grips with who needs this advice, why they need it, and what is essential to them is really important. Just moving on to the last space around mental health. Now, there's a very well documented relationship between mental, physical, and emotional wellness. But at this point in time, the level of kind of financial stress that people are under is really taking a toll. And combining that with a sense of, people falling into a vulnerable state because of their finances, and the sense that realistic advice and support is not necessarily out there, there's a really kind of significant emotional consequence that people are struggling with. And the question that sort of comes up out of all of this is this idea of what role do financial providers have to play here? What's the kind of duty of care to customers, and not just customers, that their own employees? And you can see even within the quotes, the comments, the things that people are talking about, I'm either going to cry or panic alone, a sense of being very isolated, but equally here in the centre, this idea of making people feel safe. And this one's really focused on staff within an organisation. So a really interesting space in terms of the realities of the cost of living crisis right now, but a very troubling and tricky one to challenge. In terms of some of the elements here, you can see just within the language being used that this is a very sort of negative moment for people. It's filled with worry, with anxiety, a sense of struggle, a sense of panic. And in understanding that language of personal crisis, we can start to sort of find some of the clues to supporting that. And you can see, you may not be able to see, actually the screen's quite small, but certainly within the world of finance and beyond, there are aspirational programs, there are offerings out there that actually start to speak towards this need, that are useful in terms of understanding and gaining inspiration. So I will pass back to my colleague Stephanie, who can tell us how we can move these on.
Yeah, thank you, Vic. And I think this is really interesting, like what we do with, the technology of Discover AI and the human expertise is really something that allows to define some opportunity territories. But what we want to stress is that, where we can help you is that it doesn't stop there. there are multiple things that you can do after the delivery of a project that would be, identifying these territories. You could decide to, look at these territories further and monitor them over time. So there are two ways that, you could do this. You could do some thematic tracking, just coming back to what we shown at the beginning, which was building a very big query to get inspiration. So you could continue that, but this way you would know a bit more where you want to go in terms of your thematic querying. So here, for instance, if we look at vulnerabilities, we could just look at the terms that came up in the conversation that was highlighted by Vic and create a huge query and just over time look at people's conversations about the topics of needing help related to finance or being forced to cut back, etc. And it's just very inspiring to see how people actually talk about it. You see here, for instance, that there are quite a few mentions of people talking with numbers, like just illustrating things with typical facts. So, just really, or, the things that they are worried with. So it's not only food, but you see here that, with family matters, it's also funding things which are not really like in the absolute necessity of eating or energy. So this could be quite interesting to look at. In the same way, regarding the topic of mental health matters, it's a very negative space. So maybe it could be interesting to look at how you could find ways to create a sort of psychological relief. So not necessarily looking at what people say about finance, but taking it in a broader way, potentially to look at what therapy or recovery looks like in that space through some topic browsing. And there's yet another way that you could look at things over time. In one of the spaces that we went through, A Cry for Help, we saw that it's really important to look at the voice of certain people, how they talk and how you can make it authentic. So you could imagine that you would follow a group of people that are going to be inspiring or resonating with your audience over time. So this is just an example of one of the persons that we pinpointed and looking at her conversation, and this could be inspiring for your own messaging. So yeah, I'll leave the floor again to Charlotte, who will take you to some form of conclusion around this.
Yes, exactly. So amazing. Thanks, girls. Stephanie, Vic, your work is very impactful. So yeah, I think you presented today a perfect showcase how we can combine TalkWalker with Discover AI. So this slide, the goal of this slide is to show how we can combine human analysis expertise and also AI to provide two takeaways. So Vic, you explained perfectly this point. The first one will be the springboard based on at one time, one moment. And Stephanie, you can show also how we can use TalkWalker to keep this idea to have real time. So this is a perfect complementarity between both. So I think this is the conclusion of it was the goal of this webinar to show how we can combine and we can find insight and inspiration based on all the social data conversation on the web and social network. I think it's Jack is come back. Yes.
I've returned. So if we, I think it's time for our sort of final slide. So if we can move on to that one. I think what we've seen here is, at its simplest, TalkWalker can, identify influencers, spot emerging themes. I thought that was really interesting. Unearth issues through sentiment analysis, and aid content ideation that way, but also through that sort of human cultural level, start to understand not just what do people think, but how do they feel, and therefore how do we adapt our our marketing communications to be more authentic and really speak to each and every consumer. So we've now reached nearing the end. We were aiming to keep this to 45 minutes, and we are on track to do so. So we'll move to questions. In the meantime, you should be able to scan that little QR code in the corner should you want to send any questions to us specifically, or have a demo or whatever else. We're more than happy to facilitate that. That'll take you to hopefully a very helpful page. But in the meantime, I've got a few questions that have come in. Do feel free to keep sending questions through. The first one, which is one that I like. Do you have any specific examples of what I can do to communicate authentically about the things people don't just think, but how they feel? We're finding it really hard at the moment to go beyond what we would traditionally assume people think. And now we need to understand how to create an emotional connection. Sorry, a bit of a longer question there. I've amalgamated a couple. I don't know, Stephanie, Vic, if that would be one for either of you guys.
Hello. Yes, it probably is actually a bit for both of us, but I think what you can see within the kind of the more of the sort of human-led analysis side is actually some of those keys to moving a conversation forward, to deep diving into people's worlds and the things that they really care about. So we've seen coming up in the kind of the broader reach of the project that we ran, that there are different areas that might kind of help within this. So things that are around perhaps the idea of really tailored solutions. So things that really sit in the world of people, and that can be kind of very practically. An example came up of a library in North Wales that was running a kind of one-stop advice session where they had people in from kind of utility companies, from some of the local banks, from kind of the like benefits advisory, just all in one place on one day to help people kind of navigate what's going on, but to do it in a really effective and quite personal manner. So there are certainly moments like that. There are other things that sort of came through around the idea of sort of financial education. So this sort of focus on actually, we're in this spot now, but how do we kind of prevent this from happening to our children in the future? What are some of the things that we can kind of start to layer in for them? So there are definitely opportunity spaces that exist within this study, and obviously beyond that, to help start thinking about some of the things that we can do and that we can talk about that will further that conversation.
Wonderful. Anyone have anything to add before I move on? I'm conscious we could talk for hours about this topic. No. Perfect. Someone here thanking you guys for the presentation. Can you explain again the methodology for this showcase? Is Discover AI specific functionality of TalkWalker? So I think, yeah, if someone could walk through this idea that TalkWalker is the base layer doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and then moving on to Discover, providing those cultural insights. Stephanie, I wonder if you could do that for us.
Yeah, sure. So basically, Discover AI is not really like, I would say, a functionality, but it's a complementary methodology. So basically we work together. So TalkWalker is just, as you know, it's originally it's something that is crawling social information, social media information. So basically this is a big way for us to retrieve a lot of different conversations. And then basically there is a complementary technology, which is owned by Discover AI, which is also a platform, but a slightly different platform in nature. It breaks down conversations into quotes. And then basically we use this model that we showcased earlier, which is called Accelerate, which is basically mapping out all these quotes around a model of human drivers of opportunity. So 16 different things. And that's really helping to structure clusters of conversations, but also with this prism of human opportunity. So it's also something really nice when you want to do something that reflects, you know, the emotions of people and not just something factual. And it's a faster way to to map out what could be the opportunity territories to look at. I hope it makes sense.
Thank you.
I'm happy to explain further in a further conversation if you'd like.
Yes, I was going to say the best thing to do, if you scan that QR code, you'll be able to reach out to us. Charlotte, I want to bring you in on your perspective on that. You obviously work with lots of different clients across the region. You've worked with many financial services institutions. So building on that, for a typical TalkWalker client, we've got many of them that they all have different use cases, but what are the metrics that they should be looking at to identify, whether marketing communications is making progress, both at sort of the start of the process in terms of the content ideation, but also to measure the value that they've brought to the table?
Oh, Jack, I love this question. It's very large. So it depends on the use case first, because at the beginning of this webinar, we show one slide with the framework of TalkWalker, the PMP, so protect, measure, and promote. So first, it depends, what do you want to do? What is the goal of your analysis? So first, we cannot say, so if you want to do like e-reputation or measure your campaign is not exactly the same objective. So to have the perfect KPI and the perfect objectives is difficult. This is very difficult to have one unique answer on this point. Sorry. And I think the big deal, after 7 years at TalkWalker, we were very focused before to have a discovery AI team with us. We were very focused on quantitative KPI, very quantitative to explain a lot of use cases. And today we add like quality, semantic quality, and a background around anthropology, psychology. This is very different, and it's not KPI. This is more semantic analysis. So sorry, my answer is not a good answer for you, but yeah.
No, that's perfect. I think something from my perspective, as a marketer, more and more what I see happening in the industry is people sort of moving beyond those quantitative metrics, measuring things like share of voice, measuring things like sentiment in isolation are no longer good enough. If you just count stuff, you end up in a perpetual cycle of just doing stuff, and you don't get to the heart of what matters for consumers. You don't communicate with them on the same level, and you don't move the needle. So exactly what you're saying, Charlotte, by starting with your objective setting, you can then obtain the metrics at the beginning of the process, and you can work in a far more strategic and far less tactical way. So yeah, I entirely agree. It's hard to give a precise answer with a list of 3 metrics. It's all about objectives, and it's all about moving beyond just counting stuff, from my perspective. Wonderful. We've got a couple of more questions come in. So someone here says they're using a social listening tool and they have a separate platform for media monitoring, but they don't think it gives them the full picture. They're sort of both in silos, I guess they're saying. Are there any other data points that they should be looking at? Charlotte, Vic, Stephanie, one for whoever wants to pick that one up.
I mean, from my perspective, I come from a qualitative research background. So the answer in all honesty from where I sit is always the voice of the customer or the voice of the consumer. But building, I guess, even beyond that, beyond sort of media monitoring, beyond social listening, there's a huge swathe of kind of cultural insight that exists out there online, whether that's around things to do more broadly with society and some of the potential touch points that has with the things that you're monitoring, that you're looking at, through to kind of like those really sort of day-to-day kind of flash in the pan almost moments that exist in consumer conversation. I think all of those, when looked at in detail and through this kind of angle of sort of humanity and the reality of people's lives, actually is another sort of layer, I guess, within that world. But I will also leave the floor to Stephanie and Charlotte on that point too.
Yeah, Stephanie, go ahead.
Well, I think there's always a question about aggregating like a lot of data sources to find insights. And yeah, I believe here at Talkwalker, we're trying hard to have as many sources as possible. And like we're also able to do some custom integrations if necessary, so that people don't feel like they need to go and check, you know, different silos of information to get to some insight. So I think depending on the question, it's important to design what are the best sources to look at and how we can combine them to, you know, to get to a faster route to relevant insights for the use case that you have in mind.
Wonderful. I think going back to a recent campaign we did at Talkwalker on brand love, you know, every brand wants to be a loved brand, but in itself, you know, what does that really mean? If you walk into the boardroom and say, "Hi, I'm a loved brand," you know, that's not demonstrating very much in itself. So our methodology for that is all about providing a more holistic view, not just looking at earned media, where essentially they're saying what most likely what you want them to be saying, or it's a view of just the journalist, or just owned media like your social channels, where you know you're talking very positively and your consumers are probably engaging in extremes. They're either very positive about your product or very negative because they have a complaint. What our brand love methodology did was look at passion, customer satisfaction, and trust. And amongst all of that, there were different methodologies. So we brought in review data. So we were identifying, okay, who are your consumers and how did they feel about you versus, you know, the rest of the general public. Emoji analysis, because sometimes, you know, consumers aren't passionate enough to leave full text reviews, but they might give something a thumbs up or a thumbs down. By doing things like, we can also do things more broadly, like logo analysis, understanding the context of where your brand is appearing. So I think it's a good question, actually, moving beyond traditional media analysis or just social listening to give you a fuller picture of who your consumers are, where they're hanging out, how they feel towards your brand in their point in the sales cycle. That's what needs to be done in today's marketing communications, going beyond just working in isolation and monitoring and measuring in isolation. It's a great question. The other question we had was about a QR code not working, because I think it gets cut off if you're on full screen. So apologies for that. I've hopefully fixed that issue with the biggest QR code I've ever seen. So I'll close that question down. Do we have any more questions before we wrap up? I don't think we do. Well, wonderful. Thank you very much for joining us today. We said it would be 45 minutes and it has been 45 minutes. If you would like to get in touch, as I say, do scan that QR code. We'd love to hear what you thought of today's session, but also if there are any ways that we can help your organization, whether it's in banking, financial services, or whether it's in tech, whether it's in CPG, whether you're an agency, whatever it might be, we're more than happy to help. So do scan that QR code, pop us an email at contact@talkwalker.com. And of course, we wouldn't be a social listening consumer intelligence organization if we didn't tell you to join the conversation on social. So feel free to give us a shout on Twitter with @Talkwalker. Thank you very much for your time. We'll, of course, be in touch. But for now, that's all from us here. Thank you.